Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery. I'm preparing to check in on one of my worm bins. This is the bin where we've been going back and forth, changing the location of the feeding zone, because in my systems I typically just always plop the food down in the middle, but sometimes I vary the feeding style. Sometimes I do this ping pong style. I've tried that pocket feeding approach where you go from corner to corner to corner. Sometimes I don't even bury the food. Sometimes I do like a surface feeding. But here we're doing the ping pong test, and this is going to be the 10th occasion on which we've positioned the food on one side or the other of the bin. So I've got a detailed diagram showing where we've put each of the feedings in the past. So why don't we get the camera down a little bit closer so that everyone can see what we're working on, and then we can get started on feeding these little guys. So here in the diagram that I mentioned earlier, you can see that it's not the 10th feeding overall, it's actually the 12th feeding overall. Because the first two feedings were positioned down the middle, and then later on we came to the determination that, yeah, you know what, we're going to try the ping pong style. And then since this is built in a spreadsheet, there's all kinds of calculations going on over here, such as an overall day counter showing that, for example, these little corn cob spheres, little chunks of corn cob around this size, have been in the bin for over 3 months at 67 days now. We can see that the most recent feeding here, which consisted of Brussels sprouts, as well as the big thick stem that the Brussels sprouts come on, that was put in here only 10 days ago. Sometimes I wait 12, 14 days between feedings, but when I'm feeding the way we do here, it does seem to me like we can increase the pace at which feedings are applied, because while they're still working on a feeding on one side or the other, we can actually get over into the opposite side where pretty much 2 feeding intervals have passed already, where they're probably almost pretty close to being done, if not done with what they got last time. But that's not true, because the one thing we can almost guarantee is that they're not going to be done with the stuff that they've been getting lately, because we've been trying to feed materials that are going to last, things that are going to be slow, So the last feeding, here's the diagram from last time. And it's almost accurate. It's only 10 days behind from where we're at today. But I do try to go in there and I update it, so if there's something that we noticed is now gone, I'll just mark it off as gone. I'll just strike it out as being gone. But I think last time we saw that this diagram had degraded much, much further because we were still covering with plastic. The last time we decided to do away with the plastic coverings, that's the reason we only had newspaper out here as the top covering, to try to allow the system to release a little bit of its moisture content. So I ended the last video by just placing the diagram down and then leaving myself a little to-do item at the end, which was to find some sort of a paper type covering to allow the system to air out. So the feeding zone indicator was here, if you might have noticed, which was also the side of the bin indicated on the diagram. So the feeding today, number 12, is going to be on that side. But before we excavate the side that we are feeding in today, we'll usually go to the previous feeding just to see how it's progressing. The other thing that we've been doing in here to try to address the moisture, besides me changing the coverings, was that I added extra bedding. So I added bedding which was actually dry. I usually use a dampened, moistened bedding in my feedings, but I opted to use dry shredded paper cardboard in here because I thought it might help absorb some of the system's excess moisture, and not only that, but I also started into the whole idea of possibly going to the opposite side, the side that we weren't going to be feeding that day, and adding moisture there. I mean, adding dry bedding there too to help absorb some of the moisture. So I don't think it's really done much, because I definitely feel a lot of moisture. I was able to tell right away too when I lifted the system. It had a great deal of weight to it. So I think we will definitely be sticking with the paper only covering. And now we're starting to get into some of the stuff that we fed last time. 10 days, I guess, is just not enough for them to have eaten all of this Brussels sprout. So besides the stem of the Brussels sprout, and these are those right there. You can see a couple worms kind of taking interest in it, or maybe they were just kind of on it or over it when I extracted it from the feeding zone. It's still extremely tough, so I don't know how long that's going to take, but some of these things are in here by design because they are expected to take a long time, such as this pumpkin stem here. Something that's clearly going to take quite a long time before it starts to make any progress. So I'm not sure what other types of leftovers we're going to find over here. Let's get back to the nice clean version of the diagram, right? So we've already seen the Brussels sprouts, the pumpkin stem. There was a veggie mix put in here with other types of stems, the stems of peppers. There was a banana peel, but after 55 days, it's fair to assume that the banana peel is probably gone by now. Here's the stem of another pumpkin. So the two pumpkin stems, one of them is 80 days old, the other is 33 days old. This is probably the 33-day-old one. Once we get to the 80-day-old one, perhaps we'll see a pumpkin stem that actually exhibits a little bit more progress, but there's not a great deal of difference between the two. I think that the smaller one, is there really a noticeable difference? The curved one is the older one. I'm just assuming that that's the case just based on its coloration. It seems like the younger one, the one that's only been in here for about a month, is still showing signs of green color. And then all the other stuff that we're seeing in here is just residual bedding type materials. Here's some more stuff, parts of the Brussels sprouts. And there is a good bit of moisture, so I think we're probably going to do a little bit more of what we've done over the past couple check-ins, which is to come in here with a little bit of my dry shredded paper cardboard that I believe I have some of it remaining from the last time I created a batch of prepared bedding. I had shredded enough of it that I had some left over. And I think we're going to blend that in here as we return the contents of this side of the feedings, this side of the bin. We'll just blend in a little bit of dry material. So let me go fetch that and we'll give these little guys a chance to settle in a bit. And then we can reconstruct this side of the bin and then proceed to feeding them over on the opposite side. So I'm not going to say that having a system that exhibits signs of possibly excess moisture is a bad thing, because in certain ways it's probably even beneficial to have an abundant amount of moisture in a place where you're attempting to compost with worms, because the worms, number one, breathe through their skin, and the way they get the oxygen into their system is by being in contact with moisture. So them being in contact with moisture means that they're able to breathe easily, resulting in presumably happier, healthier, more active and vibrant worms. And not only that, but I guess just the moisture content of the foods that they're tasked with eating and the bedding that they're living in all makes it easier for them to chew on. Here's one of those pepper stems, still holding out quite nicely. The worms always manage to burrow down into one of these things and hollow it out, and then what you're really left with is a much more fibrous material, just still, taking shape as the pepper stem. So let's drop in a little bit more material and then combine perhaps a little bit more dry bedding. But like I said, perhaps there is a certain amount of advantage to allowing the system to hang on to what might be perceived by some as excess moisture. Oh, banana stem still holding out. I wondered if it might still be here in some form. If there's any banana peel left, it's typically going to be its stem. I gotta say, the turnout in that feeding zone is quite nice. Lots and lots of worms hanging out in there. And it makes me wonder, what are we going to encounter when we get over into the opposite side of the bin, which now has seen 21 days. since the last time we were over there to feed. Pumpkin, lime, avocado, pit, and peel. So 21 days since we last fed on this side. And guess what? We're kind of doing an encore performance of the avocado pit and peel. That's what they're getting more of today. And you know, when I started brainstorming, what other interesting things do I have around here that are going to be a slow composting item? Sort of similar to the pumpkin feedings. This is like what I think they refer to as a gourd. They're usually put out around houses as decorative stuff. So people put out not only jack-o'-lanterns, but these little colorful gourds. And these things definitely take a long time too. So there's other stuff in here, apple peel, coffee, and whatnot. So it's a pretty generous feeding. Feeding the side of the bin that was last fed 21 days ago. And I'm curious to see what kind of a turnout we're going to have over here. I'm always interested in seeing what the worm population looks like in this system, because when we started these little guys out in their previous home, so like you might have seen on the counter, there's all kinds of stuff being calculated on this document. One of the things being calculated is just the overall age of the bin. 125 days of age at this point. When we moved these little guys into this system, they had been moved out of an environment that was gradually built up from being a small space into a somewhat larger space, gradually increasing the size of their available living space based on the increasing number of worms that made up the population. And when we started out that system, prior to relocating the worms, we had started out with what had been estimated to be only a few dozen worms. And we've since nursed them back to a fairly impressive number, if you ask me. I mean, some channels, the learn by doing channel, you know, there's certain references made to the carrying capacity, or I guess just sort of the limit to which you can expect your worm population to grow just based on its physical size. And I guess that becomes a topic when you're dealing with a small environment into which you want to place a worm population. They'll grow to a certain size, the population that is, and then they'll limit their reproduction once they sense that they've possibly maximized their exploitation of the available space. And here I sometimes wonder, you know, have we possibly met the system's carrying capacity already? Do we still have some way to go? It does seem like the system has grown nicely in terms of worm population. The one thing that I should probably put onto that diagram is some reference to the estimated starting population of the system when we first launched it, because that's one of the other statistics that I share with the viewers sometimes, because it is interesting to see what the estimated worm population is of a system, because it's an estimate. You know, it's not me counting every one of the thousands of worms that live in a system. It's an estimate based on input from all the viewers. So when the system was launched 125 days ago, I would have polled the users to comment and ask them to all suggest what they believe they see as far as the size of the worm population. And then I always share that estimated worm count with the viewers after it seems like the suggestions have stopped coming in and we've got sort of a final number. And offhand, I just don't remember what that number was. So for me anymore, at my advanced age, it seems like if it's not written down, I'm going to have a hard time remembering it. So that's pretty much the feeding, and we've not yet even placed in any of this dry stuff. Maybe we'll put a little bit of it down here just to complement the old diagram and the old feeding zone. We've got ourselves a nice replacement feeding zone here. And let's see, before we cover up this feeding zone, let's treat them to a little bit of pulverized eggshell, which is the grit that I use in my systems, as well as a little bit of my worm chow, which I've replenished. You know, in this batch of worm chow I used perhaps a little more than I usually do. Sometimes I include just leaves. The leaves that I use as bedding in some of my systems. And when I mixed this batch up a couple days ago, I included a good amount of just leafy matter. So that's the feeding, and oh geez, we've still got all the leftovers from previous feedings. This thing here is one of those corn cob spheres. I believe there was 3 or 4 of them that we were able to locate. I can't remember exactly how many of them had been fed, but it does seem like the corn cob is finally at that point where it's softened up enough that we can start shattering it. And that was just to satisfy my curiosity. If we see any more of those, I don't think we'll be shattering them. We'll just allow the worm bin to be the sole contributor to their breakdown rather than me helping with that process. So let's just go ahead and put a little bit more of this dry stuff in here. I mean, I don't think that the stuff that they received today was terribly juicy or damp. I don't think it's going to bring with it a whole lot of moisture content. Here's another one of those spherical pieces of corn cob. The reason that they're spherical is I created a batch of pulverized corn cob, and some of the chunks just went around and around rather than breaking up within my little blender. They just sort of went around and around within the blender, and then I had a little collection of spherically shaped corn cob bits, and I set them aside. And I'm not even sure if there's any other systems where I've been using them. This might be the only one. So kind of a little novelty item. At some point I'll have to do away with the rest of them, but I do still have a nice little collection of my spherical corn cob bits to use somewhere. So I'll be updating this diagram to show what we just added here. It was some slow composting, some fast composting stuff. I believe the apple peel will probably go pretty quick. The banana peel will go gradually, but then the stem will remain, as we saw an example of over here. The avocado pits and peels, those are going to take some time, but that gourd, I'll be curious to see what kind of progress it makes. And that was a pretty good size feeding, if you ask me. And we'll be sticking with this paper-based top covering here to allow the system to possibly lose a little bit more of its moisture content, because it is quite heavy. You know, when I go to lift it, it is quite heavy. And you know, we didn't even use up all this stuff. I thought we'd use more, but that's fine. I think we did a good job here. Hopefully the worms are satisfied. That's the end of the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Take care.